Two young fighter pilots of the Indian Air Force. Squadron leader Lokendra Sindhu, 31 years old, and Flight Lieutenant Rishi Singh, just 23 years old. Two lives at different stages of their journey, but both on the exact same path, the razor-sharp road of a fighter pilot in the Indian Air Force. A path that demands everything and often takes everything. Lokendra had become a father exactly a month ago. A baby who will now grow up knowing his father not through his voice or his embrace, but through the stories his squadron and his country will tell. Rishi, so young, 23 years old, still training under his senior, still absorbing the brutal art of air combat, still discovering the sky. They were hunters, air warriors, ready to fight even if Operation Sindhu had escalated, ready to launch into war if the order came. And yet this week they were taken not by the enemy, but by a crash, an accident. In this moment of unspeakable grief for two families, their squadron, and for the Air Force, which is more than a service, it is a family after all of air warriors. It's easy to reach for the usual phrases, flying coffin, widowmaker. We've heard them all before, but here is the truth. Our boys, our men are still flying, not because they don't know the risks, but because they do, and they still choose to fly. The Indian Air Force is one of the most professional air arms in the world, if not the most professional. It would never, and I repeat this, the Indian Air Force would never knowingly put its pilots into cockpits that are not airworthy. But it is also true that the Indian Air Force is stretched. It is flying fighters that first took to the skies in the 1960s. Yes, they've been modernized. Yes, they've been upgraded. But time does not lie, and you cannot change time. Every fatal crash is not just a tragedy. It's also a mirror, a moment to ask ourselves the hard questions about modernization, about delays, about the systems we send our warriors up in. This aircraft crash in which Lokendra and Rishi perished was the third Jaguar crash this year. We owe Lokendra and Rishi their moment of honor, but we also owe them answers. And tonight, we ask those questions for Lokendra and for Rishi.
Two young Indian Air Force officers, Squadron leader Lokendra Sindhu and Flight Lieutenant Rishi Singh, lost their lives in a tragic Jaguar trainer jet crash during a routine training mission in Rajasthan's Churu district on Tuesday. The aircraft went down in open fields near Bhanoda village, killing both men on impact. Squadron leader Lokendra Sindhu, 31, was a native of Rohtak in Haryana. He had recently become a father. Reports said his wife gave birth to a baby boy on June 10 and was still at her maternal home when the news of his death reached the family. A decorated officer, he had over a decade of service in the Indian Air Force and was known among colleagues for his precision flying and calm leadership in the cockpit. He was also a qualified flying instructor responsible for shaping younger fighter pilots in frontline squadrons. Flight Lieutenant Rishi Singh, just 23, hailed from Pali in Rajasthan. A promising young officer, he was undergoing advanced training as part of his operational conversion onto fighter jets. Known to friends as disciplined and fiercely patriotic, he had only recently earned his fighter wings, fulfilling a dream he had pursued since childhood. The Indian Air Force confirmed the crash and announced a court of inquiry into the cause. The crash has sent shockwaves through the Air Force community, particularly as it comes within months of two other Jaguar accidents earlier this year, one in Panchkula and another near Jamnagar. While no civilians were harmed, the loss of two highly committed officers has once again reignited concerns over the IAF's aging Jaguar fleet. Both pilots were flying the twin-seater Jaguar trainer jet, a variant of the deep strike aircraft inducted into the Indian Air Force in 1979. Despite multiple upgrades, the Jaguar remains a legacy platform, and India is now its sole active operator worldwide. As the investigation begins, tributes are pouring in for the two officers. Squadron leader Sindhu leaves behind a grieving family and a legacy of service, while Flight Lieutenant Singh's death has silenced a career just beginning to rise. For their families, colleagues, and the force they served with pride, this is a heartbreak that won't heal easily. Bureau Report, NDTV.
And I repeat, Squadron leader Lokendra was just 31 years old and Flight Lieutenant Rishi was just 23 years old. It doesn't get younger than that when it comes to fighter pilots. But what does it take to actually get there? What did it take for Lokendra and Rishi to get into the cockpit and fly fighters for the country? Let me show you, because many people actually don't know what it takes. There are very stringent entry requirements. There's a STEM degree. Physics, maths are, of course, mandatory to be able to become a fighter pilot. Entry requirements including the National Defense Academy. And then you go to the Air Force Academy, of course. Age typically 16 and a half or more to 24 years. And remember, 23 is what Rishi was. Stringent written and SSB exams that you need to cross. And there is no let up in the difficulty of those exams. 6x6 vision, uncorrected and often tested over and over again. Perfect cardiovascular and neurological health. There is aeromedical testing that subjects all candidates for fighter training into all of these aspects. Cockpit spatial awareness testing also takes place at different levels. G-force tolerance evaluation is critical. Centrifuge testing, aerodynamics, avionics, flight systems. This comes to the training part, weapon systems and threat response. I'm going over these really fast, but the fact is each one of these things takes a huge amount of time. They go into navigation, military protocol, communication drills, emergency drills, trainer aircraft like the Pilatus PC-21 for their basic training. Then they come to intermediate training where they focus on takeoff, landing and maneuvers. Then they do night flying and instrument reading, flying in bad weather, emergency protocols, flight theory. All of this is both practical as well as in theory. Aircraft like the Hawk, the Tejas, sometimes people go abroad to fly during exercises in F-16s, supersonic flight, dogfight simulation, ground simulations, weapons delivery systems are then mastered, and finally they get into electronic warfare and countermeasures. They upgrade into fast jets, final evaluation on a full combat jet, not just a trainer. That's when they really start becoming the fighter pilots, and there they start training for air-to-air and air-to-ground operations. This is the final chapter in multi-target tracking and locking onto hostile targets. Remember what the Indian Air Force did just recently in Operation Sindhu, mission readiness under combat stress. I have given you a bare sampling of the many rigorous steps it takes to become a fighter pilot. And every single fighter pilot, including these two young men, Lokendra and Rishi, had to go through this to get there. And that really makes this tragedy all the more heartbreaking. Tonight on India Matters, I want to bring on three veterans from the Indian Air Force who've all flown fighter aircraft, who've all been parts of squadrons, who've all seen air emergencies, and who've all seen what loss can be like. So there is an emotional aspect to what we're doing today, but there is also a technical aspect. There are questions that need to be answered. Group Captain Anant Mathur, welcome, sir. He has commanded a Jaguar squadron. He's a veteran pilot who knows all about the Jaguar. Group Captain Ajay Alawat, also a veteran fighter pilot and knows more than a thing or two about fighter flying and emergencies. Air Marshal Sanjeev Kapoor has headed the safety division of the Indian Air Force and is also, of course, a veteran fighter pilot who has a 360-degree view on every one of these aspects that we're talking about. Group Captain Mathur, I will come to you first, since the subject matter we're talking about is on Jaguars, and I will do this with Air Marshal Kapoor's permission. Group Captain Mathur, the Jaguar, getting to be a pilot in a Jaguar, tell us what that is like and what your emotions are like today, seeing the end of these two young, promising Jaguar pilots, sir.
Hi, good evening, Shiv. Firstly, it's very ironic that today is Guru Purnima.
Yes.
And this accident happened when a guru was trying to train his pupil into low-level navigation.
Yeah.
It's a very demanding exercise which requires you to fly at low levels, and you're flying at about 900 kilometers per hour, which is about 250 meters per second. And you're just flying 300 feet, 500 feet below, carrying out complex maneuvers which involve turning the aircraft initially light bank angle of bank about 45 to 60 degrees, and thereafter increasing the bank angle to 70 to 75 degrees and turning the aircraft flying level or slightly climbing so as to avoid any kind of birds or any man-made obstructions, hills, anything and everything. It is exciting, it is thrilling, at the same time it is highly dangerous.
Would they have not been able to eject at that altitude, sir? What do you think may have happened? Because the natural question most people were asking is, even in a low-level flight of this kind, would the reaction time have been too low? What could possibly be the reason for the pilots not being able to eject?
Shiva, I would not like to hazard a guess at this stage.
Yeah.
With the very limited data. I think you have as much data as I have. However, in these aircraft, the Jaguar has a very good flight data recorder and a cockpit voice recorder. I'm sure the Air Force will find that equipment. It will not be difficult for them to come to the reason what happened. Because an accident like this could be because of the human error aircrew, human error servicing, a technical defect, or environmental reasons. Very few times these accidents happen unexplained. But this is to be found out by an expert team. The Air Force has already said that they have set up a court of inquiry. And we must trust the Air Force to come out with the right answers. It is important for the Air Force, it is important for the families, and it is also important for the nation.
Very important, and I appreciate you giving me that answer. We do not wish to jump to any conclusions. Air Marshal Kapoor, there are also the facts that this is the third crash of a Jaguar this year. There have been 4 crashes this year. We know that each one of these are investigated separately. They're not looked at as the same. But does that tell us anything about the Jaguar, about the aircraft type? We know for a fact, and we've said so clearly here, that the Indian Air Force would never allow its pilots or men to fly in an aircraft that is not unairworthy. Airworthy, I beg your pardon. But what do you read in the fact, or how would you explain to the public that this was the third crash of a Jaguar this year in which 3 pilots have been killed, sir?
You can't relate that the 3 accidents have taken place, so there is some problem with Jaguars. It's not so. Yes, of course, the Jaguar is an aircraft which has been in our Air Force for more than 4 decades. But don't forget the US Air Force, the Royal Air Force, and the Israeli Air Force are flying aeroplanes which are nearly 4 to 5 decades. The F-15s which took part in strike over Iran were nearly 5 decades old. So just to say that we are flying old fighter aircrafts in our Air Force and the others are not is incorrect. That is one. Number 2, the extent which Grupi Mathur just covered, it's a low-level flying and it inherently comes with large amount of risk. And the reaction time is too short at that speed and altitude for the aircrew to have taken any action if there was time. The most probable thing is to ease up, convert your speed into height, and then take when the emergency or some action which requires. But in this case, with both the pilots going down, something has happened too sudden. That's my wild guess. The one factor which your viewers should know, India is a very peculiar country where the pilots have to train. Nowhere else in the world does a pilot have to do hill flying at that altitude in minus temperatures over Leh Ladakh, has to fly over sea, has to fly over desert, has to fly over jungles, has to fly over, typically a French Air Force pilot who has to do desert flying comes to UAE. When a Singaporean has to fly hill flying, they come to India. So there are no, but India is a subcontinent by itself.
Yes.
And all the aircrew and all the aeroplanes are exposed and trained, the aircrew to be, so the training process is quite exhaustive. The
Yeah.
other thing which you covered, what a pilot has to go through, one factor which is generally not talked about is the role clearances which everybody has to go through. So it's very, very unfortunate. And having lost these two pilots and two before that, it's really heartbreaking. And I covered in the other channel the other day,
Absolutely.
the worst feeling is to carry the coffin, like you see here, of your colleague on your shoulder. There cannot be anything more painful than this.
It truly is the most heartbreaking thing, and I have, reported on the last rites of so many air warriors during my career, and it truly is heartbreaking. Before I come to Group Captain Alawat, I just want to, just by way of data, put out some information here on what accident figures in the Indian Air Force look like in the last 10 years. And remember, things have vastly improved. Air safety is a much greater ideal now for the Air Force than it has been before. So between 2015 and 2025, there have been about 40 fighter crashes that have taken place. A total number of 12 Jaguars have crashed. This is only data. There is no pattern in this. 3 MiG-29s have crashed in that time. 6 MiG-21 fighters have crashed. This is the oldest fighter in the Indian inventory. Continues to still be there, but soon will be retired. Mirage 2000s, 3 have been lost, including one in February this year. 5 Su-30 MKI fighters have crashed in the last 10 years. And one Tejas, indigenous homegrown Tejas fighter crashed during an exercise last year in Rajasthan. A total of at least 20 pilots, including 3 this year, have lost their lives in all these crashes. So that's just a data point. But Group Captain Alawat, in the wake of a aircraft accident, and especially this one with people seeing, third Jaguar crash, etc., you see on social media and in the media in general, people using very unsavory phrases which you are familiar with, things like flying coffin and widowmaker. What would you say to phrases like that being used in this context, sir?
Well, Shiv, very sad and tragic accident. 2 young lives were extinguished. This is also a very grim reminder that freedom, something we take for granted, is not free.
Yeah.
We pay for maintaining our freedom in blood and treasure. All pay taxes. So there's a famous quote that says, all give some and some give all. So these accidents that you flashed before I spoke is the tax, or is the due that the citizen soldier pay to maintain the freedom that we enjoy. To people who come on social media and say things that they should not say, I would only say, freedom of speech is a fundamental right, which is also available to people who disagree with you. And these are the very freedoms that we rise up to defend. Free speech is something on which our nation is founded. And soldier is committed to defend whatever values a nation decides to hold. Coming specifically to this accident, I would want to make a technical point. Old does not mean unserviceable. You've covered it yourself.
Yes.
When the Form 700 is offered, it's a booklet where the engineer signs and offers the Form 700 to a pilot. In the collective wisdom of the squadron, that aircraft is airworthy. We have invested our faith, our training in that Form 700 when we offer it to the pilot. So accidents will happen, especially when you fight, when you train like you fight. Flying low level, likely in a GPS denied environment, the trainer was likely pushing the young pupil to the edge. So at 200 feet, it takes 1 second at a rate of descent of 200 feet per second to go and hit the ground. Very challenging training, and we ought to pay a price.
And it's a terrible, terrible price that has been paid. And I agree with all of you when you say that only a court of inquiry, a detailed investigation will actually result in clarity on what really happened. But I admire the opening thoughts from you. Before I come back to you for a second round of questions on this discussion, many people instinctively start saying, oh, this is old junk. why are we playing with, putting our pilots into these old aircraft? And I'm glad all three of you have clarified on that one point, which is that old doesn't mean unserviceable or unflyworthy. These are all aircraft that the Air Force takes very seriously and would never, ever think of putting pilots into an aircraft that they don't think is procedurally safe. But is there a larger issue? Are we saddled with too many older generation aircraft? Should there be newer generation aircraft? Before I put that question to the three officers on my panel tonight, let me just show you what's coming up as far as the Indian Air Force is concerned. We've shown you what already exists, but there are 180 Tejas Mark 1A improved Tejas fighters that will soon start being delivered. They're over a year late, which is why the Indian Air Force Chief is very, very upset. 114 multi-role fighter aircraft, which could either be the Rafale or aircraft competing against the Rafale. A decision has not been taken. Most of them will be built in India. The upgrade of over 270 Sukhoi 30 aircraft to something called the Super Sukhoi standard is something that is on the table but has been delayed for a very long time. There has to be perhaps a decision on a stopgap stealth fighter, which could be the Su-57 or the F-35. It could be neither, we don't know, but Pakistan is getting some very soon. So is that going to be something in India's near future? All questions to ask. But Group Captain Mathur, coming back to you on this, is there an issue with not having enough modern fighters, or is that a completely separate issue? Because that is a question on people's minds when they see a crash happening. The instinctive question is, too many old aircraft, why do we have so many old aircraft, etc.?
Shiv, you just showed the photograph of 180 Tejas Mark 1 Alpha.
Yeah.
And you asked the question, where are they? So the problem that we have is that whenever you're making a new aircraft in our country, there are three broad phases. First is the bureaucratic phase, which involves getting acceptance of necessity, making sure that the financial projections are in place, the calculations are in place. This is phase one. Phase two is when the metal is cut and the aircraft is actually made. And phase three, when the testing is being done. The phase one, despite us having a dynamic government in the history of independent India, takes so long that phase two and phase three are never seen. And this is where we need to attack, so that we come up to where China is already making stealth aircraft while we are looking to buy them.
Continue, sir. You were making your point.
And this is what I want to say, that, in our country, where we need to focus is phase one, where bureaucratic delays happen. We talk about the AMCA, but the first plate is not cut. The first metal is not cut to start making an AMCA. So we need to work on these issues. We need to cut down on the delays which happen while files are being pushed. We can't remain paper warriors. We have to get these things as early as possible. And that is where we need to work on. And all our team members there who are sitting in Ministry of Defense, who are sitting in HAL and DRDO, they need to work faster so that the aircraft is available for testing. Because remember, problems come in testing. You can predict everything on files, but you can't predict what happens in the air. And that is what we need to do.
Very true.
Because we don't need to keep playing catch up all our lives if we want to be the developed country by 2047, as per the Prime Minister's vision.
Marshal Kapoor, there is an issue. Modern fighters are not entering service with the Indian Air Force fast enough. There are bureaucratic delays, decision-making delays, planning delays, which have cascaded and compounded over the decades and landed the Air Force in a situation which is far from optimal, whether it is fleet strength, whether it is the mix of fighters that it currently has. It would like a much better situation than it is right now. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I agree, because we presently today have about 30 to 31 squadrons. The sanction strength is 42, and if we count two front war, the number of squadrons required are much higher. We have about 6 squadrons of Jaguars, and we cannot ill afford to delay, and it has been spoken on every forum. Now, the issue is totally technical, what Group Mathur just brought out. I'll reiterate that point. Say, simply put across, if we are working moving a file that we need communication equipment, and that stage 2G is working. So by the time the process moves, the file moves, the necessary clearances come, it's 3G is launched. So when you go to them, you say, no, but you had asked for 2G. Why do you want 3G now? So then we say, no, 3G is latest. Then by the time the whole process begins again, 4G is launched. So we are in our systems behind the curve.
Yeah.
The way the tech is moving, the way the innovations, we have to have in-house capabilities to adapt and change while the things are on the drawing board as per the latest. This is one. Secondly, coming to the shortfall,
Yes.
we may take a long time to operationalize AMCA or the other platforms which we are discussing. And the suggestion which I have been giving and spoken on this on many forums is that we may have to go off the shelf to bridge this gap. There is absolutely no doubt in anybody's mind that we need to be Atmanirbhar, we need to be, and Op Sindhu just showed that. But how do you bridge this gap till you are fully ready to have your own platforms going?
Yeah.
This gap will have to be met by some help from outside, and we may adapt or change these equipments and platforms as per our requirement. This is just a thought I have.
Very interesting. Group Captain Alavat, we've seen the Indian Air Force Chief express his exasperation and frustration with delays in getting even basic items like the Tejas Mark 1A, which is our own jet. Of course, there are some extraneous factors as well, but he is not happy at all with all of these factors, whether it is bureaucratic hurdles, whether it is over-promising and under-delivering. And all of these, of course, affect the product mix which is there in the Air Force, which has a cascading effect at some level, I'm sure, on where the Air Force wants to be.
The LCA Mark 1, 40 of those were to be delivered by 2016. And we are in 2025.
Yeah.
Serial number 39 and 40 has not yet been accepted by the Air Force. Mark 1A, we see a lot of pictures. I don't see a Squadron flying Mark 1A. Anyways, let me connect this old versus new to the accident at hand. There are two things, technical things. One is situational awareness, another is spare mental capacity. If a pilot is aware of his attitude, altitude, height, speed, direction, where the aircraft is in reference to a map, where the other formation members are, where the threats are, where the friendlies are. So if the situational awareness is good, the pilot or a set of pilots has a little adequate spare mental capacity. So if things change, they can use that spare mental capacity to deal with changes. When the workload in the cockpit increases, then there is situational overload and there is not enough mental capacity available to deal with contingencies. So at low level, if the navigation failed or the GPS failed or some other system failed, and if both of the pilots are doing head-down work, I don't know if that happened in this incident or not. The narrow point I'm making is a modern fighter offers enhanced situational awareness that allows the crew to maintain a higher level of spare mental capacity.
Interesting.
Like the F-16, F-35. I'm not, pitching for American fighters at all. I'm just giving an example because they have something called GCAS. When the system senses that ground collision is imminent, the autopilot takes over and pitches up the aircraft. That gives you additional 3 or 4 seconds, which are enough at that stage to take corrective action. So a newer aircraft will offer better situational awareness, which will lead to higher or a better level of spare mental capacity. When it comes to, sorry, let me make that point. Air Marshal Kapoor said Su-57. So, French made a beautiful wall called Maginot Line, and they thought it is indefensible. It turned out to be useless. It could just happen to stealth aircraft as well. Counter to stealth is not necessarily a stealth which we buy, at exorbitant cost. Counter to stealth could also be an anti-stealth system, VHF radars, bistatic radars, or other tech that makes stealth meaningless. If you have to pump in money, we might as well pump it into something that is ours and stay ours.
Okay. We'll have a separate show entirely on what India's stealth priorities need to be, but I'm almost out of time, so I'll leave the last question to Group Captain Mathur, which is, the point being made about how there is a correlation between the age of a fighter and an accident, even if the aircraft is actually fly-worthy, because older generation aircraft might not give pilots the same amount of freedom to be aware of what's happening around them. They may have to keep their heads down, or head down work, as you call it. Could that be a factor, sir? Is that something that you would think about as well, Group Captain Mathur?
No, I think for this particular incident, I don't think we should link the two factors, because being the first dual check that was being flown, this is all about introducing the young pilot to what it looks like when you are flying at low levels. How does the earth look? What rate is the ground moving? And what does it feel to fly at higher speeds at low levels? The whole feel of this. Then how do you turn? How does the horizon look at that stage? How should you look out for birds and other obstructions? So this was the first flight, a dual check that the young pilot, Flight Lieutenant Rishi Raj, was being exposed to. So this aspect of doing a lot of head-down work is not a factor here. This kind of work is not done in the Jaguar. It is done at medium levels when you're carrying a lightning pod or a laser designator pod, where you use these type of missions. It is not required at low levels in the Jaguar aircraft per se. We should not count that as a factor in this one.
Can you, as someone who has flown missions like this, you have flown with instructors and you have trained younger pilots as well, Group Captain Mathur, sitting in a Jaguar, what kind of conversations would have been happening between Lokendra and Rishi? As we remember them tonight, I just want you to describe that experience for us, that bond between an instructor and a trainee pilot, and what that flight would have been like.
I think the first thing that comes to my mind is the camaraderie that exists in a fighter squadron.
Yeah.
The camaraderie between all the pilots, that they are there for each other. And the buddy system that prevails in the squadrons, where seniors are responsible for bringing up the juniors, not only in terms of their flying skills, but also in terms of their social skills, how to behave, what is it like to be an officer and a gentleman. And when it comes down to flying this kind of an exercise, it involves initially showing him how to descend, at low levels. You can't be descending at a very high rate of descent. How does the perspective or the ground look? The whole scenario looks at 1,000 feet, 500 feet, 250 feet.
Right.
How do you commence a turn? What are the safety aspects that the pilots need to keep in mind? All turns should be level or upwards, no descending turns. These are some of the aspects that are drilled into each and every pilot when they are learning these things. And when it is being taught and somebody is being taught about these things, then the professionalism is of a very high order, and there is a great learning experience that a person who is learning for the first time carrying out low-level nav in a fighter at this speed gets exposed to, which young Flight Lieutenant Rishi Raj Singh was getting exposed to. So again, a very tragic incident.
Yes.
But really, I've flown many a times these kind of flights and trained many a pilots, and even as an examiner tested them on these things. But I think Air Force has maintained its tradition of passing down expertise and excellence in fighter flying to succeeding generations of fighter pilots. And I feel once again my deepest gratitude to both their families for having sent their sons into the Indian Air Force.
And that is the note we will end on. And I join you in extending our thank you to the families of Lokendra and Rishi for the service and sacrifice of their sons. Our deepest condolences to both those families in Haryana and Rajasthan, to their squadron and to the Air Force, which, like I said at the beginning of this show, is really just one big family. We mourn with each and every one of them.